The school I grew up in cultivated creative chaos. Kids ran through the halls, bounded up and down the stairs, and bounced off the walls of the classroom. We had no grades. I don't know if we had any rules, but one man sat unmoved behind his desk, full of gravitas. Mr. Marchiaro taught 7th grade Latin, and he accepted no tomfoolery. He was my favorite teacher. He would cold call on his 12-year-old students at random, demanding you parse each word in the sentence. And if you guessed, or you fudged it, or you weren't present and paying attention, Mr. Marchiaro would look you in the eye and say, "Ms. Breit, God is in the details." It was mildly terrifying. But also, I knew it to be true. And it was a truth I need to hear. Because most of the time, I think details are useless. Busy work, a waste of time, something to skip over to get to the heart of the issue, to be faster at understanding, more wise, to understand the essence of what's really important. But Mr. Marchiaro taught me details are powerful. They can force you to pause and pay attention. And details can contain God. In this week's Parsha, in Parshat Truma, after leading the Israelites out of Egypt with a series of ever grander and awe-inspiring miracles, parting an entire sea, God appears to the Israelites and says, "Asuli mikdash, let them make me a holy place, a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'tocham, so that I will live among them." So we should make a house that God can live in. God, the infinite, omnipotent, omnipresent, ineffable force who turned their lives upside down and brought them out of Egypt, he asked them to build a house that can contain that divinity. How? How could you feel anything but overwhelmed? How is such a thing possible? How can we build a place where God can live? In the details. The blueprint we get for God's house is all details. Parshat Truma is overflowing with the minute details of how to build the Mishkan, God's house. Planks of acacia wood, what fabric is draped on what surface, the assembly of gold rings, posts, where to put every peg and utensil. And each measure is given in human size, in human scale. God's house is assembled amah by amah, arm's length by arm's length, and tefach by tefach, hand's breadth by hand's breadth. These details translate the overwhelming, the indescribable, the impossible, what's too hard to even think about, into something we can start, into something made up in the size of our hands. If God had just said, "Make me a holy place," no details, no blueprint, something abstract, something enormous, something really beautiful, how could they begin? It would have been the vision of each person of what's a holy place. What's holy? What's the good place we can live in, and how should it look? Each with his own vision of the invisible. That's a conflict there's no real way to reconcile. But details allow everyone access. Each Israelite participates, and that's how the Parsha opens. Each Israelite brings truma, a gift. In this way, the Mishkan, the holy place of the Mikdash, is made up of the details, one person's fabric, someone else's spices, another person's precious stone, and these things, these gifts that people bring from their own homes, build the holy space. You can go into God's house and see what was once a part of your own home, something you brought or made, the work of your own hands. Details can make something possible when you're overwhelmed. They're a way to start. They're the next thing to do, the next step to consider, and they make it possible to translate divine mandate into human scale in a way that each of us can belong, and each of us has something to offer. Details also make us more expansive. They bring beauty and richness beyond any plain description. They can take something small and connect us through it to the majesty of the world. When describing the menorah that the Israelites will build and put in the Mishkan, The text goes at great lengths to describe each cup for oil, covered in almond blossoms, shkedim, each leaf and petal, petal by petal. Such detail demands an image. If you've ever been to Israel in spring and seen the blossoming of the shkedim, whose fluffy white blooms spread across an entire valley expanse, these verses might evoke a sense of natural wonder beyond the menorah itself. A detail can be like a little grain of sand in an oyster, that little nothing, a little agitation that forms the basis for a pearl. The details give us access to a level of beauty and wisdom we wouldn't have otherwise. One of my favorite teachers here at this school, Professor Hertzberg, taught us this in Parshanut, understanding Torah through rabbinic commentaries and analysis. He taught the delight of finding the details that jar you. A word isn't consistent, it doesn't quite make sense, it's repeated, it gives you pause. Ma kashe la Rashi, in his words. What detail bothers Rashi here? Asking that question can open up a vast world of meaning and understanding and wisdom, layers we wouldn't have found without paying attention to the details. And details also connect us to one another. There's a story about Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. And when she was watching the movie be filmed, she was crying, moved by what she saw. She came up to Gregory Peck, who played Atticus Finch, the father, after filming, looked at him with tears in her eyes, and said, "You have a potbelly, just like my daddy." It's the details of people we love that can really touch us, move us, and help us carry them with us. In the Mishkan, God's enormous presence doesn't suffuse the whole structure in the area like a giant cloud. But God is present in a detail of connection, in the space between two kruvim, the cherubim, eye to eye, wings outstretched overhead and touching each other. It's in that detail, in the connection between their eyes, that God appears. The Netziv, a 19th century rabbi, says this is because of the love in their eyes, locked on each other. This detail alone brings God into the space. And this detail wasn't lost. In this week's Haftarah portion, King Solomon also builds a temple, and it looks nothing like the one in Truma. Stone in place of fabric. He levies a tax to build it. He doesn't get gifts. But still, the kruvim are there, eye to eye, wings touching. It's the detail that brings in God, the place that God can appear. And details are replicable. They can be carried with us from place to place. They're transportable. The powerful way of bringing something divine with us, maybe something as divine as love or connection. For me, they're a pair of red socks, the only kind my grandfather would wear, or the smell of crunchy fall leaves, no matter where I am, that bring me to my childhood, or the hook of a song I know too well that reminds me of all the ways I've been alive. May you feel the blessing in the details, to make an overwhelming task possible, to find endless beauty from the smallest things, to feel the deep connection that a detail can bring, and take it with you wherever you go from here. God is in the details. It's an honor to give sources for my Torah, so I'd like to thank my teachers, here named or otherwise. You never know what lesson someone will walk away with 20 years later. I'd like to thank my parents. My dad is here, who gave me a love of Latin and the beauty of the world, and to my peers, whose belief in my Torah brought me here today. We conclude with Kaddish D'Rabbanan. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divrach hiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh. B'chayachon u'v'yom echon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olmei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'al v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudasha. Barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran ba'alma v'imru. Amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmidei Hon v'al kol Talmidei Hon v'al kol man da'askim b'oraita די באתר הדין ודי בכל אתר ואתר, יהא להון ולכון שלמה רבה, חינה וחיסטה ורחמין, וחיין אריכין ומזונה רביחה, ופורקנה מן קודם אבוהון די בשמיה ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא ברחמיו יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. You made me cry. You made me cry. You cried.